Hi, this is part two of Unit 1 U.S. History Regents Review. We're now going to talk about how eventually these colonies, the original 13 colonies, begin to develop their own separate sense of identity and eventually break away from the mother country, Great Britain. The colonies were able to develop their own sense of identity, a sense of being Americans, not just British citizens, partially because of a policy called salutary neglect. Salutary means voluntary, neglect means to ignore. So Great Britain chose to ignore the colonies for hundreds of years, basically let them do their own thing. So they got used to governing themselves and making their own decisions. Another influence that's going to be important on the colonies is this movement that's taking place in Europe called the Enlightenment. This is a movement that emphasizes the political rights of individuals. This is going to influence the colonists to eventually argue for independence from Great Britain. And feel free to check out this chart over here that includes some of these ideas. That people have rights, that there is a social contract, John Locke argues, between the government and the people. And once the government starts to abuse the rights of its people, those people actually have the right to overthrow that government for breaking the contract. Government comes from the people. The people are the source of government. So these ideas, as they spread around Europe, become really important to these colonists as they read and exchange the ideas. For example, in this painting up here of Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson, they eventually write and edit the Declaration of Independence, which borrows heavily from these ideas. So what are the causes of the American Revolution? There was a war that Britain fought against the French and Indians, called the French and Indian War or the 7 Years' War, and it is very expensive. Although the French and the Indians lose this war, Britain has gone into some massive debt paying for the war. So, in order to pay this back, they're going to need some money. They're going to get some money by charging taxes. So, their taxes increase, and the colonists are very upset about this. They argue no taxation without representation, meaning since we are not part of the British Parliament, we had no say in these taxes, we should not have to pay them. Keep in mind, in reality, though, the Americans really had a pretty good deal going for them. They did not uh, pay that many taxes before this. They had the British military, the might of the world, protecting them. And they actually got to enjoy a lot of benefits as citizens. But they've gotten used to being left alone. Remember, there was salutary neglect before this, and now that is all ending. Britain begins to enforce laws about trade, for example. One set of laws is called the Navigation Acts, which said you can only trade with the mother country and you can only use British ships to do so. And we had gotten used to cheating on them and trading with other countries like Spain and France. And now they're saying, no, for real, we need to collect those taxes. We need you to just trade with us. Because they had a system called mercantilism. Notice the word merchant is almost right in it. This is a system that's meant to make money for Britain by creating a favorable balance of trade. The goal is for that mother country to gain as much money by controlling trade and exporting more than it imports. And it had that kind of relationship with the colonies, but we are becoming more and more frustrated with that trade relationship. The Enlightenment, as I mentioned before, this movement is happening. It influences a lot of the big thinkers in the colonies, including one man named Thomas Paine. He writes this pamphlet called Common Sense. It's common sense for us to break away from Great Britain. This pamphlet circulates throughout the colonies. People realize that we should break away. Why is this why is this country far across the ocean regulating what we do? It doesn't even make sense. They're upset about the Quartering Act, which allows the British redcoats in the cities to demand housing and food from some of the townspeople. We're mad about that. And as we make these complaints and war begins, eventually we will send an olive branch petition asking for the king to, um, you know, address some of these grievances, some of the things that they're mad about, and the king refuses to read this petition. So again, we've mentioned taxes. The famous ones are going to be the Stamp Act, which taxes paper goods. There's a sugar tax. There's a tea tax. Um, we're upset about trade. And we're beginning to get these Enlightenment ideas about how we should be treated. And a phrase that has been starting to circulate, join or die, started during the French and Indian War, but is becoming popular even as this war begins. The idea that the colonies actually you need to unite as one. What are some of the events before the war? Some of the famous ones, the Boston Massacre, as portrayed up here by Paul Revere, where some redcoats, some British soldiers in Boston, ended up firing upon some of these colonists. So they had, I mean, in reality, they had probably been provoked to do it. They had been harassed. It was an accident. But they afterwards circulated images like this to make people upset, to think that, these soldiers had purposefully attacked these totally innocent colonists. The Boston Tea Party is in response to the tea tax that we're really mad about. They dump a bunch of tea, millions of dollars worth today, into the British harbor to protest the tax. They're just destroying property. I mean, things are getting a little crazy. And Britain responds by punishing Boston. They close down the ports. The people of Boston give it the nickname the Intolerable Acts, because they're really going to hurt their economy by closing down the port of Boston. After these issues, the Continental Congress forms. This is a group of representatives from each of the colonies getting together to talk about these issues. And eventually, fighting will begin. The shot heard round the world was at Lexington and Concord, where the first skirmishes took place. Eventually, the Battle of Bunker Hill is fought in Boston. And finally, the delegates from the Continental Congress will get together and decide that, yes, instead of just making the British fix these problems, we should actually become our own independent country. Wow. Now, take note, the most of the resistance, all of these things, all these issues are happening in New England. Why? They're on the coast. They trade. A lot of these issues affect them directly. So most of the patriots, the people who wanted independence, tended to live in cities. They tended to live up north. However, this was not a unified front. There were many people called loyalists who wanted to remain loyal to the British crown. And a lot of them lived in the South and Southern plantations who were totally okay with British rule. They liked that there were people to buy their crops and help them make money. So let's have a document time. The Declaration of Independence. This is one of the most significant documents in not just US history, but world history. This is one to know. Originally penned by Thomas Jefferson in 1776, it says, "When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation." So basically, if we are going to break up with you, Great Britain, if we're going to become our own independent nation, we should explain why. Here's the line. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent, the permission of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and institute new government." These ideas are huge. They're revolutionary. They are declaring that people actually have natural rights just by being human. And while not all the people at this time are going to enjoy these rights, people are going to take these words seriously for the rest of human history and seek to have them for themselves.